Hello and welcome to an impromptu little podcast for thesixthaxis.com. I'm Stefan, and today I'm joined by Andrew Bennison, who is the managing director from Prospect Games.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So you've got a game coming out pretty soon on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, which is Unbox, Newbie's Adventure, and it's out on 26th of July. Just to cover all of the platforms, though, it's already been out since towards the end of last year on PC, and it will also be coming to Switch sometime this year. So my first question will be, well, let's start off with just a quick chat about Unbox itself, where it's come from, and obviously what you're doing now with the console release.
Okay, great. Yeah, so first things first, Unbox Newbie's Adventure is a 3D platformer about the ultimate postal service, self-delivering cardboard boxes. It's a kind of throwback to our gaming lives in the 90s when we were playing Mario Kart, Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and even the likes of Doom. It was all the sorts of things that influenced us to become games developers, all wrapped up in a very weird, boxy form.
Yeah, and there's this nice little revival of the 3D platformer genre at the moment as well. Is it nice to see that you're not the only ones, like, returning to this genre of yours, this favourite genre of yours?
I think it's almost essential for us, just because if nobody else was doing 3D platformers, we'd be kind of out on our own. And usually it's good if there's a couple of FPSs or a couple of racing games coming out, because it means that genre is alive and kicking. And so yeah, definitely, we think it's great, not just as fans of the 3D platforming genre, but as designers as well. It's been really interesting that, like ourselves with Unbox, clearly developers are striving to kind of revive the genre, but not bring all of the luggage from the 90s, because those platformers had flaws. The industry and our way of making games has changed. And so across the board, it's been really interesting to see people trying to innovate in 3D platforming and make it fit for the 2000 and beyond generation.
Yeah, I think we're ever so slightly beyond the 2000 generation now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Much as it pains me to be able to say that. As you're bringing it to console, how are you finding the process of just getting up and running on this generation? Because you're not just doing Xbox One and PS4, but you're also doing Switch, which is its own peculiar little challenge.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we've basically made things about as difficult as possible for ourselves, which is kind of like the indie mantra. It's like screw up, and screw up some more. We basically, when we started, we were developing out of our kitchen. We had really freshly set up the company, and so for us, we were kind of very rapidly trying to build this weird, wacky game that we didn't quite know what the end product would look like, while also trying to build up our company and actually have a semblance of professionalism, while then simultaneously creating the links in the industry so that we knew the people at Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo to be able to get the dev kits. And so the part that made it the hardest for us is we'd made a huge amount of the game before we were actually able to acquire those dev kits. And so everything from going from not just from going from an open system to a closed system, PC to consoles, but also all of the rules and the caveats that come with that, that are in place as quality control to make sure that everything that comes out, say on a PlayStation, is of a minimal level of quality, that you're not going to be playing something completely broke. Well, that's all well and good, but if you don't plan for that as a developer, for all of those rules and all of those features that have to be supported, all of those bugs that you're not allowed to just patch later, they've got to be in, they've got to be fixed from day one. That was the real main challenge for us. And so it's been a great learning experience, and for our next product or products, we're going to be able to build with consoles in mind much smarter from the get-go.
Yeah. How much has it helped you with the game engine? Because I believe you're on Unreal Engine 4?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, and how much because that is, it's one of those wide game engines where it can target so many different platforms. How has that actually eased the process for you in actually going onto console then?
There's been a lot of positives. There's also been a lot of challenges. So the challenges have been, when we started developing in UE4, I think it had only been out of public beta for, I think, 4 or 5 months. So as we were building up that game and using features, a lot of those features were in beta or were coming soon, and we were kind of predicting things would be added or weren't going to be added. So the engine there, working with any new engine is a challenge. In more recent months, and especially kind of over the last year, it's become a lot more stable. A lot of those features are out of beta, and yeah, the support for the platforms has been extremely good, especially for the Switch. Epic has moved extremely fast to provide as much support as possible. And so the porting across the board has been pretty useful. They have a lot of assets and resources available for us to give even the most naive of indie devs an idea of like, all right, if you are going to ship a product, here's what it would look like. It's almost like a coloring book. It's like try fill in the same gaps as us, and you might just get your game out. So
stay within the borders, and you'll be fine.
Exactly, it will look like a lovely picture, maybe. So yeah, no, they've been very good at making sure that they've now got a very stable platform, supports everything, and the moment they're going beyond consoles, they're providing augmented reality support for iPhone and integrating Vulkan and all sorts to make sure that your product has the potential to be on everything from a potato phone to the best PC on earth.
One of the interesting things about the market right now is that we've got the PlayStation 4 Pro and we'll soon have the Xbox One X. How are you catering to that with Unbox Newbie's Adventure? And also, do you feel that there's still the kind of power deficit to PC? I mean, obviously you still have to cater to the original PlayStation 4 and the original Xbox One at the same time as being able to push further.
So yeah, with Unbox Newbie's Adventure, we're just essentially leveraging that extra power to make it run a little better. On both platforms, it'll still be capped at 30 FPS, but we're able to do a bit more on those kind of beefed up platforms and just on like the Xbox One and PS4. In terms of like power deficit, it's one of these things where it's like you're always going to be able to build a PC that's better than any fixed platform. If you have the money, you can put a £5,000 rig together, and it will be the most powerful thing on earth. But that to me is not really what consoles exist for. They exist to be essentially closed systems. The working on PC is a double-edged sword. It's like, sure, you have technically unlimited power to play with, but you actually have an infinite number of configurations of systems to cater for and test for. And we actually extensively tested with a QA company who have hundreds of different PCs and found all sorts of weird things where a really high-end PC would run the game great except for one issue that was awful, and then a really low-end PC would be absolutely fine across the board because of the different types of hardware configurations. So yeah, PC lets you play with more, but also you've got to bear in mind that most of your market doesn't have a £5,000 rig. So the advantage of a closed system is that you can develop, you know what the baselines are, you know what that platform can handle. So that's great, and I actually think that the fact that we have beefed up PlayStations and Xboxes maybe long term is a bad thing, because again, the advantage of a closed system was you have a baseline, you know that the game's going to run, you know what the controller inputs are, somebody can't plug in some kind of crazy contraption, it all has to fit to spec. But now in the modern age, you have constant firmware updates. You have constant things changing. One moment it's all about the games. Next moment it's about pizza apps that can interact with your products, and you've got to make sure it all fits together. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, now we have like two versions of every console. These are closed systems that are fragmenting to the point where all of their advantages, in my opinion, are kind of slipping away. And I think it's very interesting that I understand why they're doing it. It's to try keep up with a very rapidly moving technological scene, and to try compete with the likes of PC. But I do wonder for the future of these platforms if they're going to keep doing iterative upgrades that cost just as much or potentially more as the previous platform, because as developers it can make our lives very hard. If you're prepared for it, if you're AAA and you have a lot of programmers that you can throw at a problem, fair enough. If you're not, it's tough. And so I'm very interested to think where are these platforms going to go next? Are we going to see more fragmentation of each generation, or are they going to try it, flip it, and go for something more long term? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's something that's a worry for gamers at the moment, because it's just like, okay, are we going to get a proper PlayStation 5, which kind of like draws a line after the PlayStation 4 generation? There might be backward compatibility, but it's the next technological leap. But I think from the developer's perspective, what you mentioned with the fragmentation is interesting, because we see developers, and even like huge developers, where they're just like pushing out an update which can only do like enhanced anti-aliasing, and it still sticks with 1080p, instead of going for what Sony and Microsoft would prefer them to do, which is, you know, full 4K or checkerboarding and like pushing the resolution on.
Well, it's like I mentioned with our production schedule, that if you begin developing a product without all of the target platforms, not just in mind, because we were thinking, yeah, we want to bring Unbox to absolutely everything, but if you don't actually know what that platform's architecture is like, what are the compliance rules, you know, what are all the structures that you have to comply to, if you don't know all of those things from the get-go and are building that product to fit into those things so that it will fit there, yeah, you're going to have a lot of backtracking and rebuilding of various things in order to make this stuff work. Now, we were fortunate that the introduction of PlayStation 4 Pro and you know, the Xbox and even the Switch, because we didn't even know the Switch existed or was coming when we started Unbox Newbie's Adventure. So that even those platforms being introduced and those being a little blindsided by them, going, "Ooh, this is going to be tough." It's not been as bad as I was expecting, but we've certainly had our challenges to overcome. And if we were slightly less lucky, if we were a more unlucky developer, maybe this would have been an extreme problem for us. So I just feel that further fragmentation increases the chances of us having more issues to deal with. And yeah, consumer satisfaction probably decreasing. I don't actually buy that much gaming paraphernalia or consoles or that much anymore, just because I spend all my days making them. I don't have time to play. But you know, you look
There's
at
a lot of games that you'd have to catch up on these days, to be fair.
Like half a decade's worth, yeah, and just all the peripherals and gadgets, VR, AR, you know, controllers, new versions of consoles, season passes. That all of it it's a much more costly lifestyle than it was when I was younger. And you know, we still had N64 games that were like 60, 70 quid. It was ridiculous, but there was a couple of games a month. It wasn't a couple of games and a new version of the console every other year and season passes and DLC and this and that. It's you know, it's become an extremely expensive lifestyle, and I can't imagine consumers would want more of that. I think they want costs going down, not up.
Yeah. On the other side of things, you talked about getting dev kits from the manufacturers, and when we started talking about this chat, you were very keen to get your thoughts about this out into the open. So, how have you found working with Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony? And do you think that like public statements have been reflecting like behind the scenes attitudes as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the public statements, yeah, they come about because of changes that are happening internally. I think that for all of the platform holders, I think for everybody in the industry right now is an extremely difficult time, because it's the market's just flooded across the board, and the sort of the kind of indie gold rush, yeah, that's come to an end. The accessibility of the mobile market was completely saturated now. The accessibility of Steam really saturated. Every platform has basically had their indie phase. Like Xbox has had it, Sony has had it, Nintendo's kind of having it right now, to be fair. And so yeah, like these, you know, there are market trends that come and go, and so absolutely, like some platforms are now more into indies than others. I mean, Sony's flat out said it. You know, after the E3 conference, people went, "Well, where are all the indie titles?" And they've gone, "Well, VR's our thing." And I think it would be very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction and go, "Oh, well, you know, Sony's just kicking indies to the curb and they don't care about them." And it's like, well, to be fair, they're a gigantic business with, you know, a huge amount of responsibility, and they also have one of the only VR peripherals actually out on the market that's selling. And it's like there needs to be content for that hardware to drive further sales. So it's one of these tough things where if I was in that position, I'd be going, "Yep, sorry, indies, you're taking a back seat. We've got to make some money off of this thing."
Do you feel maybe that Jim Ryan kind of misspoke about what they're doing? Because with PSVR in particular, there is definitely a kind of irony in him saying, "We've got VR to talk about now," as opposed to indies. But the thing is that VR across the board its library has been largely built up on indie developers, indie experimentation, and just people just putting games out for it that can explore the way that the system actually works.
Yeah, well, it's also a case that most people are making money off of VR at the moment. So there's not a lot of huge companies that can afford to invest in VR products. So it kind of comes down to bedroom developers who maybe have, a day job allowing them to tinker on things. I think, yeah, maybe it's a miscommunication. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, they've got to focus on VR products. So maybe indies will be their primary, their kind of primary content creators for the platform. But that cuts out all of the indies who aren't doing VR or who have no desire to do VR or who again can recognize that VR across the board is not really making anybody any money right now in the way that we all thought it would by this point. So why would I as an indie dev want to take that risk of investing in very specialized hardware and trying to target a very niche market in the grand scheme, when there's so many more other potential options out there, with the biggest one I'd say right now being the Nintendo Switch. That is the most fertile land for games developers in the market right now. It looks great, and there's no content on a platform that's selling out in every region across the world. So whether or not they put out a statement and it was misinterpreted, it certainly doesn't. It doesn't bode well for indie devs.
He said what he said. I don't think you can really misinterpret what Jim Ryan said there. But I think that maybe he kind of simplified it a lot to get a kind of point across,
Maybe, but and again, it comes down to, well, if we see suddenly a lot of support for journey type games soon, and we see more conferences putting indies as sort of the crown jewel of the platform, great, then yeah, you'll see indies moving towards that platform. But the problem is right now is it doesn't feel like that. We know that there's been a lot of changes internally with, I think strategic content was basically completely shut down, and quite a few influential figures from that department left ahead of time anyway. So the guys who basically created the indie like renaissance for Sony, who brought in all of those indie titles, they've all moved on to different companies. And so it's like those point of contacts have even gone.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Shahid Kamal in the UK, Adam Boyes in the US there. Those are both really big champions of indie games.
Yeah, they pretty much, they were the guys who in the early days brought indies to PlayStation. They recognized that Microsoft with the Xbox 360 was dominating the market and basically kickstarted something none of us saw coming. And they thought, well, we can do one better. And then they did. And now they've all moved on. And, now a lot of developers, including ourselves, are getting really positive vibes from companies like Nintendo. And it's a case of, most developers at our level can only afford to work on one thing at a time. That thing has to sell or our companies are gone. We're done. And most indie developers are passionate enough that, our livelihoods, our lives are on the line with this, that, you have like Cuphead developers remortgaging their house. We've taken out loans and invested our own money into this and done friends and family rounds and all sorts. It's like there's a lot riding on this. We need to see success. We need to see that we're going to make a profit. And, so if a platform is basically coming out and saying, not necessarily you are yesteryear, but almost saying that, and all of the people who could help you get on that platform are now gone, it's like, right, well, I've got to go to where the money is, like any business.
Yeah. So there was after E3, there was the kind of like snide reaction to the Xbox press conference where there were lots of coming to Xbox first games, or I forget the exact term that they used.
Yeah, there was a lot of like exclusivity, but then like a hyphen that was like exclusive for
for now, yeah. And like from what you've just said, it sounds like a lot of these exclusivity periods are simply like marriages of convenience almost, where it's like we can focus on one thing, we'll get the support from Microsoft, and then after that we can look to spread to other platforms.
Yeah, that I think because there was a big thing about Xbox having the parity clause in place, which a lot of indies felt it hurt them. And I think they've very much eased up on that in recent years, where it was basically if you come out on another platform first, you're not coming out on Xbox. I think they kind of dropped. I don't know if they ever officially dropped it, but I don't really think that's now the case anymore.
Yeah, I think initially what they said was, okay, well, we need to have some exclusive content then. But I'm not sure if there's that if it's even going that far anymore.
No, we've not personally experienced that with pitching things like Unbox. I think the exclusivity periods can help, provided that both parties are getting a great deal. So obviously the platform holder should be having exclusive content either permanently or for a significant period of time. For the developer making that product, well, they need to have the potential revenues they would have had from doing, say, a multi-platform release or a release exclusively on another platform. That has to be subsidized in some way, and that's either a direct payout or it's through some other means. Like, okay, we're not going to be making revenue by doing multi-platform, but you, Mr. Platform Holder, are going to provide us X amount of marketing support that we could never have garnered by being a multi-platform title in the first place, or could have afforded to just fork out ourselves. So,
I mean, getting onto the stage at E3 is a pretty big deal.
oh yeah, stuff like that helps. But again, you've got to factor in that, especially it comes down to what your product is. So for us, we expect a lot of mainstream interest in Unbox, especially amongst parents, grandparents, older family members, because we've tried to very much gear it towards being family friendly, kid friendly, and that's been our experience at over 30 events over the past 2 years that we've exhibited at. And so yeah, E3 exposure is great, but ask your dad what's E3. He's going to go, don't know. A mobile company, I'm not sure. So you need to make sure that they're going to be putting you as close, like really it's about, I need marketing support as close as possible to the buy button. And that's through your dashboard. That's retail support in shops. That's newspaper ads, whatever it is. You've got to be putting me in front of the actual consumers who are interested in buying my game. And big flashy shows at E3, great, that's awesome. I mean, I'd love to go, love to be on stage, tick it off my bucket list. But I've got to be able to see a return on investment for these things, and if I can't, then that's not good enough.
Yeah. We talked about the personnel at the companies, but do you think it's the people behind the scenes or the kind of market position where the companies are in different positions now than they were a decade ago? So that, if, for example, Sony was kind of the underdog with the PlayStation 3 for a long time, and that's when they targeted the indie market. And now that the tables have turned, it feels like Microsoft are very much being, at least a fair bit more open to the indies as opposed to they were when they were on top.
I think it's all of the above, and it's just it kind of comes down to, I guess, what's going on at that company and where they are positioned in the market. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's driven by the market and by consumer choices. Like that's what everyone's reacting to first and foremost. But then internally, I mean, it's I can't say name names, but like, is politics a thing in any business, in any industry? Absolutely. Like, a certain features of a platform or products or whatever getting pushed harder or trying to be squashed because of the politics of a company and the people within it and how they're trying to move up the ladder. Like, absolutely. And that's unavoidable. And so you've kind of got to balance all of these things of like, okay, where is the platform position in the market? Like, who are they trying to target? Who right now does strategic content exist or not exist? Has this guy moved to a different company? Are they about to release a VR peripheral? Okay, then I need to be able to support VR features in my game to leverage marketing support, or but there's a whole plethora of things, and then there's so much uncertainty. Microsoft tomorrow could just announce, hey, we're bringing, because they are developing VR kits. They've just not directly tied it to Xbox One. But what happens if tomorrow they suddenly do? Or, Steam quite rapidly dropped green light and changed their whole system of getting onto the platform. And that's stuff that, these things happen every couple of months, constantly. And if I'm working on a product right now that's just started pre-production, it ain't out for a year, 2 years' time. Well, how many things are going to have changed between now and then? Right now, Microsoft could be going, we absolutely love indies, they're the best thing ever. And next month, I'm into production, I've got investors on board, my product's happening, and they go, oh, indies, less important because we're launching an AR platform. Okay, well, I might be screwed. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and you've just got to always bear in mind, like, but market always changes, people change, business priorities change, Don't go so niche, or don't be so stuck on one idea that your entire life depends on it, because like life has other plans.
Yeah. I do find it still, going back to Jim Ryan's comment again, because it's there, it's on my screen at the moment. I still find it strange that he said that indies are less relevant now, especially when you consider that some of the biggest games of this year, even like we're only halfway done, but some of the biggest games of this year are actually indies. You've got PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Friday the 13th. Last year you had so much critical acclaim for the likes of Inside, the year before that. If anything, I feel that indie games, and obviously there is such a broad spectrum here that we're talking about, from bedroom coders to relatively large companies, but indie games as a whole feel more relevant than ever.
If I was to play devil's advocate and agree with them, as an example, all of those names you just mentioned are either from established studios or established IPs that already have large followings. So like PlayerUnknown was a mod that's been going on for years. Inside, sequel to Limbo, by an established name. Friday the 13th, again, if we could leverage an IP that has 30 years of pedigree and
yeah, that's fair.
yeah, and so it's a case of, maybe he's right. Maybe indies as a mass group are less relevant, because when you look at the actual titles that are succeeding, they're coming. Most of them are not coming from people working in their bedrooms. They are indie studios made up of ex-AAA staff, or it's the sequel to a hit indie game from 5-10 years ago, when it was a lot more profitable to be an indie in your bedroom, or it was a lot. I don't want to say easier, but there was more routes to market potentially. The platforms were more fertile land, as I mentioned before with the Switch. Yeah. So as a group, yeah, maybe we are less relevant, and if you're targeting certain studios, if Stardew 2 is coming about, or a Friday the 13th game, or a bunch of people quit Bungie and form an indie studio, but they've got investment back, because that's another thing, you don't see what's happening behind the scenes. You don't know, well, is Microsoft pumping loads of money into marketing for this, or do they have investors? I feel that just because there's a team made up of like 4 or 5 people doesn't necessarily make them indie. Nor does working in your bedroom necessarily make you indie either. I guess the term kind of doesn't really mean much anymore, which might be, again, what he's saying is that, like, the term indie, it's sort of like it's been used so much, when it can include something like PlayerUnknown, but also Inside, but maybe also Unbox, but maybe also a tiny game made by a guy in his bedroom. Like, the term sort of becomes meaningless, and what's more important is just focusing on IP. IP is what has value.
All right, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us, and I think that's been really interesting to get your perspective, and a kind of behind-the-scenes look at the life of indie developers in these interesting times, as I think the proverb would go. So, finally, how can people get a hold of you, and is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
Well, if they want to get a hold of me personally, go onto Twitter, and I am at @Bennison. That's BENNISON. If you want to follow Prospect, it's at prospectgames.com. And if you're interested in Unbox, go to unboxgame.com, where you can find links for both the digital and retail and special edition copies of the ultimate 3D platformer about cardboard boxes, Unbox, Newbie's Adventure.
Yeah, and just to recap, it's already out on PC. It's coming to Xbox One and PlayStation 4 on the 26th of July. And if you're one of those lucky people with a Nintendo Switch, that will be later on in 2017. All right, thanks again. And this is where we say goodbye. So, goodbye.
The Sixth Axis Podcast.